What is going on, Snooker fans, and welcome to the first video of this World Snooker Championship season. The qualifiers are set to get underway today, and just like last year, I will be going through the entire qualifying draw, breaking down all 16 sections, highlighting who I think will be the main contenders, and seeing if there are any potential underdogs that you should be aware of too, before ultimately trying to pick who I think will join the seeds at the Crucible in just under 2 weeks' time. Now, quite honestly, my predictions were awful last year. I only got 5 out of the 16 correct qualifiers. So we're aiming for at least 8 this time around, with the hope that we might be able to get into double digits. But this is going to be a very, very long video. So get yourself a drink, get comfortable as we go through the entire draw. And so we begin right at the beginning with 17th seed Gary Wilson, who despite winning 2 titles last season, has found it much tougher going this season, ultimately causing him to lose his top 16 seeding, which he had 12 months ago. His best run this season was at the International Championship, where he reached the quarterfinals, but it has been, for the most part, a bit of a slog this season. But if we're looking at players who could be capable of stopping the 2019 semi-finalists from reaching the Crucible, it is rather slim pickings here. Dominic Dale is the second highest seed, which is in no small part helped by the 20,000 he got for reaching the Crucible last season. However, the Welshman has confirmed that he would be retiring at the end of this season, bringing to an end a 33-year career for one of snooker's most colourful characters. And it would be fitting for him to go out on a high by qualifying for the Crucible one final time. And you can bet he'll be putting everything into making that happen. He pulled it off last season, becoming the second oldest ever player to qualify for the Crucible. So who knows, he might be able to repeat that trick again. Elsewhere, there is Rory Thor, who has picked up several notable results this season, including against players such as Neil Robertson, Mark Williams and Robert Milkins. The 37-year-old Malaysian has never qualified for the Crucible before from his previous 7 attempts, so could be a consideration for a possible debutant, but I struggle to see him winning 3 best-of-19s here if I'm being completely honest, even though this could be considered a fairly open section of the draw. And this leads me on to Daniel Wells, who is actually going to be my pick here. Daniel is the only man in this section to have reached a semi-final this season, which was achieved at the Xi'an Open right at the beginning of the season. And he also beat Gary Wilson just a few weeks ago at the World Open. He is also a man who has never qualified for the Crucible from a remarkable 15 previous attempts. Now that statistic doesn't particularly bode well for him, but you have to imagine that he'll break that curse at some point, and this might just be the one of his best ever chances to do that. So I'm going for Daniel Wells to qualify after beating Gary Wilson on Judgment Day. Moving into the second section of the draw, and this is headed up by the Chinese duo of Zhao Yulong and Yuan Xijun, who are the closest players in terms of rankings in the qualifiers this year at 32 and 33 respectively. Now if we start with Zhao Yulong, he has had a fairly disappointing season this term, which is a real shame, because there was a period last season where he reached 3 quarterfinals in a row and was getting himself close to the top 20, but has since gone back a few steps again, which, like I say, is a real shame because we've known about him for the best part of a decade now, and he struggled to really become the player he threatened to be as a teenager. Still though, he has beaten Kyron Wilson twice this season, including at the Shanghai Masters at the very beginning of the season, where he made his one and only quarterfinal appearance. Zhao has reached the Crucible twice before, but he hasn't been there since 2019 and has also lost in Judgment Day in each of the past 4 years, so is certainly due a return to the big stage. Yuan Xijun's season has been slightly better, with his main highlight coming in Germany, where he beat Shaun Murphy and Neil Robertson to reach the semi-finals there. I've mentioned before that I find Xijun such a tough player to gauge because when he's on it, he is amazing, but if he's not, he looks like anyone in the world can beat him. He's never reached a Crucible before from 6 previous qualifying campaigns, so we could see another debutant emerge here. And he does edge the head-to-head with Zhao Yulong 2-1, which includes a 4-1 win at this year's Welsh Open. But who else here could threaten? Well, we've got the experience of Joe Perry. However, he has indicated recently that he is ready to put the snooker queue away for good at the end of the season, having really fallen out of love with the game. The gent is ranked 65th in the world, so could definitely still retain his tour card with a win or 2 in qualifying. But it's really a question of whether his heart is still in it anymore, and I would be surprised to see him come through here. Ishpreet Singh Chadha is also worth keeping an eye on, as he has proved over his first 2 years as a snooker player that he can beat almost anybody on his day. A semi-final run at the English Open is his best ever performance as a professional, and is also in a similar position where a win or two may just guarantee him a spot on tour next season. Artemis Sissons is also someone who's produced a couple of good results in the early stages of this season, and despite not stringing too many wins together, has proven, I think, to be someone to keep an eye on in the future. That being said, I do think this tournament has come way too early for him to even be considered as a contender. So all in all, it's Zhao and Yuan I expect to meet in Judgment Day, and this time I am going to go with Zhao to get himself back to the crucible. The world number 25 Jack Lisowski is the headline act in Section 3, but it will be so difficult to know what to expect from him after recently announcing that his father tragically passed away just a matter of weeks ago. Of course, we all hope to see him play here, but it would be perfectly understandable if we did hear that he withdrew. But even if he does feel up to the job, he finds himself in a very, very sticky section here. The ever-present Ricky Walden may not pick up that many results throughout the course of a season, but is one of those experienced heads that you always tend to look out for in the World Championship qualifiers. Ricky has played at the Crucible on 10 previous occasions and has qualified in both of the past 2 seasons, so that experience he has can never be discounted here, regardless of the form he might currently be in. Zach Jurity comes into this event having made it to the semi-finals in the last tournament he played in, so he'll be hoping he can pick up right from where he left off back in China to sort of mount a realistic challenge here. However, he has only ever won a single match from his previous 6 World Championship qualifying campaigns. Liu Hongyu made a semi-final last season, but any hopes of him sort of kicking on this season have never really materialised, as he's only made it to a single last 16 all season. However, if he is seeking any encouragement, he has beaten Mark Selby just a few weeks ago on his way to the last 16, where he lost to Zach Jurity. The 12-time Women's World Champion Rhiannon Evans will begin her 10th quest to qualify for the Crucible, with her best attempt coming all the way back in 2017 when she beat Robin Hull before losing out to Lee Walker on that occasion. And she'll be playing my pick as the young player of the season to watch in Anthony Kowalski, who has found his debut season on tour to be a bit of a baptism of fire so far. Mitchell Mann may have fallen completely off of the grid, but he is a man to have previously made it to the Crucible when he made his debut back in 2016 before losing first round to Mark Allen. Again though, I will be playing it safe here and go for the 2 highest seeds to make it to Judgment Day. I would of course love to see Jack make it, but with the question mark over his potential mindset going into Sheffield, he may find Walden a really tough nut to crack, so I'm going to go for Ricky to qualify. Now I am quite sure that at some point soon Hussein Fafai will want to be going to the World Championship as a seed. However, he is back again in the qualifiers with the aim of qualifying for a 4th year in a row. And he would have preferred a better season than what he's had so far. His best performance coming in his very last tournament out in Hong Kong, where he reached the quarterfinals before being completely dismantled by an unstoppable Judd Trump who made 4 centuries and a best of 9 on that occasion. He is, however, becoming one of those players you look at with interest at the qualifiers, and you would expect him to go very close yet again here. Then we have Robert Milkins, who in truth has had a season to forget, which can be highlighted most clearly by the fact that this time 12 months ago he went to the Crucible as a seed, and here he is a year later having fallen down to 41 in the rankings. 15 wins is all he's achieved all season, and most of those came in the Championship League, so all in all, it would be hard to imagine that he comes into this event full of confidence. The 2006 World Champion Graham Dott is also lurking here. However, the once extremely reliable qualifier has now failed to make it to the Crucible since 2019, having previously been there every year since the year 2000. The Scot is another player you suspect may be on the back 9 of his snooker career, but wouldn't it be great to see him get there just one more time? I do think you would expect the qualifier to be one of those 3, who should have far too much experience for everyone else here. Florian Nussel will be on a high after becoming the first ever Austrian player to join the professional circuit, and this will be a complete free hit for him. There's also Dwayne Jones, who beat players like Luca Brissell and Bang Jung-soo to get to a last 16 earlier this season, but again you'd be surprised to see much from him here. Ultimately, I'm not convinced by Robert Milkins, so I do think Graham Dott will get to Judgment Day, but I suspect Fafai will be far too strong for him there. Now, this section is a really interesting one because we've got a blend of experience and youth here. Tom Ford was really suffering a really poor first half of the season, but from around December has really turned his fortunes around. He's reached quarterfinals at the World Open and Scottish Open, whilst also claiming the snooker shootout crown as well. All of this wasn't enough to help him regain his top 16 seeding, however it does mean that he comes into the qualifiers with at least some confidence. The same unfortunately can't really be said about Ben Williston, whose best performances came in the Wuhan and English Opens with runs to the last 16. He was also a beneficiary of O'Sullivan's withdrawal from the World Grand Prix, and he did almost make it count, narrowly losing 4-3 to Sean Murphy, but overall, he has really struggled for some time now and languishes down at 44th in the rankings. We also have the veteran Mark Davis, who is very much now in the twilight of his career and will be looking to replicate what he'd done back in 2021, where he qualified as a 48-year-old. But to do that, he'll have to do something he's not achieved all season and win 3 matches in a row, which will be a massive, massive ask for him. 20-year-old Robbie McGuigan offers the youth in this section, but has found time on the main tour incredibly tough so far, and it would be quite some turn of fortunes if he was to get even remotely close to qualifying. And then there is Ross Muir, who is aiming to make his debut this year, despite never making it to Judgment Day before. A last 16 at the English Open was the best he's been able to muster so far this season. So all in all, I think Tom Ford is an overwhelming favourite to get through here. Nothing is set in stone, of course, in this sport, but on the form book alone, I think Tom will be far too strong for anyone he faces, so I have him down to beat Mark Davis on Judgment Day. The 6th section of the draw is very open, and I would suggest the most competitive section of the draw so far. Elliot Slesser leads the pack at 28th in the world and comes into Sheffield on the back of a very impressive campaign. He made the semi-finals in Northern Ireland and a further quarter-final at the British Open. And in addition to these, there are 3 further runs to at least the last 16. So by all accounts, this has been a very solid showing. Elliot has qualified for the Crucible twice before, back in 2020 and 2023. But as I say, he has banana skins placed all over the draw here. Just to get to Judgment Day alone, he may have to face Marco Fu, and we all know what he's about. Twice a Crucible semi-finalist, however, his career has been derailed ever since COVID really, and he's not played on the hallowed Crucible grounds ever since 2018. He's also failed to get beyond the last 32 of any event this season. Talented 20-year-old Ben Mertens is also present here, and despite not having the best of seasons, can certainly be a danger to anyone. On the other side of the draw, we have the world number 37 Liu Haoshan, who after enjoying a decent first half of the season where he made 2 last 16s, has since gone completely off the boil. Still though, we have a man here who has qualified for the Crucible on 4 previous occasions, and 3 of those visits have come in the past 4 years, so he's certainly no slouch over the longer matches. Long Zihong is a man who reached the semi-final this season, and that run included wins over Jack Lazowski and Mark Selby. Again, his season has somewhat gone downhill after that positive start, but there was also a run to the last 16 of the Scottish Open in the mix as well, so he may well fancy giving the higher seeds a run for their money here. And in addition to all of the men I've mentioned already, we have Zhao Xing Tong, who I correctly predicted to win 4 matches to qualify for the UK Championship last November, and he'll be faced with doing the exact same here again. Just like those performances, Zhao should have little to be concerned about. He will know this is a brutal section of the draw, but he'll also be pretty confident that he could outpot and outscore anyone here. He has also twice qualified for the Crucible in the past. So which way is this section going? Like I say, this could be wide open, and I don't think there is really a clear-cut favourite here. However, because I backed him in York, I think I'll be doing the exact same here again, so I have Zhao Xing Tong to beat Marco Fu on Judgment Day. We have 2 ties in this section of the draw. 29th seed Noppon Sankam has gone missing somewhat this season. He did reach the quarterfinals in December at the Scottish Open, but we are used to seeing a far more consistent season from Thailand's number 1. So the form guide isn't amazing as he looks to make it back to the Crucible for a 5th time. And his compatriot Sunny Akani could potentially meet him in the 3rd round here. Akani regained his tour card last summer, and the season started promisingly with wins over players like John Higgins and Tom Ford. He's also beaten Mark Williams out in China a few weeks ago, but overall, it has been a season littered with first-round exits. Ryan Day is another huge name here who has dropped down to 36 in the rankings, which does feel pretty alien for a player who, throughout my lifetime as being a snooker fan, has always seemingly been a top 32 player. A pretty quiet campaign so far goes a long way to explaining his slide down the rankings, but we are talking about a man here who has played at the Crucible 15 times before and beat Barry Hawkins' first round last year as well, so should never be discounted. David Grace is also a man who's qualified for the Crucible twice before, while Sanderson Lam will be hoping he can bring some of the form he showed at the Welsh Open where he beat Barry Hawkins and Wu Yiza through to this qualifying campaign. And also watch out for the talented youngster Liam Davies, who, despite not producing too many results this season, is certainly a player for the future. Ultimately though, I think Judgment Day will be contested by the two highest seeds here, and that will be a cracker if it does happen. And here I would just maybe favour Ryan Day to come through, as he is such an old hand in situations like this, so I have Day to beat Noppon Sankam on Judgment Day. Chris Wakelin will have to put the disappointment of not automatically making it to the Crucible pretty quickly out of his head. He was of course a seed at the UK Championship and made his Masters debut at the start of the new year, but things have unravelled somewhat over the past few tournaments, which is the absolute worst timing for him. And there are players here who can certainly cause him a headache. Martin O'Donnell is another player very similar to Daniel Wells, who I spoke about earlier in this video, who are becoming your sort of quintessential journeyman professionals, and he too has still never made it to the Crucible, which I do find very surprising. The 2021 Welsh Open champion Jordan Brown will be looking to get back to the Crucible for the second time, but rather concerningly, he has only won 8 matches all season, so the idea of having to win 3 best of 19s here seems a touch optimistic. The record of Xingzi Hao isn't much better either, as he's only won 10 matches all season long, and I would take a lot of convincing to put any kind of consideration into him as a potential qualifier as well. And I do actually think one of the bigger threats in this section could be Switzerland's Alexander Ersenbacher, who has qualified for the Crucible before back in 2020, so even though he's not made much of an impression this season, he at least has previous of not only qualifying, but he's got to Judgment Day on 2 further occasions as well. All in all, this could have been a much worse section for Chris, and even if his form has dipped recently, I still think he'll be too strong in this section, so I have him down to beat Martin O'Donnell on Judgment Day. Last year's semi-finalist and the 2015 World Champion Stuart Bingham enters proceedings in Section 9. Stuart's season was going nowhere until he made it to the final of the World Grand Prix, where he was handsomely beaten 10-0 by Neil Robertson. However, that should be a warning sign to anyone else in this draw that he will always be very hard to stop here. He's always been a man for the big occasion, and it's worth noting that he was having an even worse season last year, where he then qualified and got very close to making it to a second world final, so discount him at your peril. But unfortunately for Stuart, this is a hideous looking section. His third round opponent is likely to either be Michael Holt or Oliver Lyons. Holty of course not only qualified for the UK Championship, but then delighted everyone by reaching the quarterfinals in York on his comeback to the main tour. Ollie Lyons has also began to show his ability this season, highlighted by his runs to the semi-finals at the British Open. He was also incredibly close to knocking out Neil Robertson at the UK Championship qualifiers, and in all honesty, you have to say he should never have lost that match. He too is a man seeking a Crucible debut this year. Things really don't look much nicer on the other side of the draw. 2022 European Masters champion Fang Zheng Yi will be looking to get back to the Crucible after making his debut 2 years ago. It has also been a disappointing season all round for him, only getting past the last 64 of the tournament twice, but like I say, he has proved in the past that he can get through the qualifiers. And then there is a slight underrated World Championship qualifying expert in Robbie Williams. Robbie has reached Judgment Day on 4 previous occasions and won every single time. Not only has he won, but he won in a deciding frame on all 4 occasions, which is a hell of a statistic. So who on earth makes it out of here? Stuart would ordinarily be such a safe bet, but there is nothing easy about this section. I do genuinely think he can make a case for all 5 men that I've mentioned here, and you know what? Purely because of that ridiculous Judgment Day record Robbie Williams has, I'm going to put him down to beat Bingham to make it to the Crucible. And just like the previous section, this one on paper also looks like an absolute nightmare to call. Joe O'Connor comes to Sheffield knowing his last tournament ended up with him beating Judd Trump, Sean Murphy and Ali Carter to reach the World Open final. And the tournament before that, he reached the quarterfinals at the Welsh Open, so you do very well to find someone in the qualifiers this year who's in better form than Joe. He also beat Mark Selby first round on his debut last year, so there are plenty of positives when looking at him here. But he is surrounded by problems in this section. Louis Heathcote is a ranking event quarterfinalist this season in an event where he beat Mark Selby, Tian Pingfei and Jimmy Robertson. I also vividly remember Louis getting very close to beating Stuart Bingham on Judgment Day 12 months ago. And there are 2 very dangerous Welshmen here as well. Jamie Clark has had a pretty miserable season by all accounts. However, who could forget that memorable win over Mark Allen on his debut back in 2020 before he got a slightly dicey exchange with Anthony McGill in the last 16. He's also qualified again back in 2022, so he has very recent memories of encouragement when it comes to the qualifiers. And then there is also Jackson Page, who has had his most consistent ever season. He reached the final of the first tournament of the season and has gone on to make a further 2 quarterfinals as well. And this consistency is exactly what we've been calling out for as he starts to, try and fulfill the prophecy that Mark Williams set down for him a few years ago. Jackson has also been at the Crucible twice before, including last year, although he did take a bit of a battering by O'Sullivan in the first round. And don't fully discount Ukrainian teenager Yulian Boyko, who has beaten players like Michael Holt and Sishaiwi this season. Again, there is no clear and obvious favourite here, and you're pretty much guaranteed to have an unbelievable Judgment Day matchup, no matter how this section unfolds. I am, though, swayed by Joe O'Connor's recent form, and I am going to have him down to beat Jackson Page on Judgment Day. 19 years after his last outing at the Crucible, Jimmy White is back with his latest attempt to qualify for the World Snooker Championship. You also have to go back to 2013 for the last time Jimmy made it to Judgment Day, but to his credit, he continues to have full belief that he can still achieve this dream of his. It might also be an achievement that finally allows him to properly call it a day on his illustrious career. He's also enjoyed more wins than usual this season, with 10 currently to his name, so he should come here with more confidence than he has in the past. But can he get through the 4 required matches to qualify? World number 27 Pang Jung-soo is the highest seed in this section, and it has been a superb season from him. The highlights include a semi-final appearance in Northern Ireland, as well as reaching the quarterfinals at the World Open and Shanghai Masters. And these haven't come out of nowhere either, as he's reached the last 16 on another 4 occasions. Pang has also successfully qualified for the Crucible in each of the past 2 years, so will certainly have plenty of belief that he can do the same again this year. His compatriot Xu Zi has also had a fine season, which has also included 1 semi-final and 1 quarter-final appearance, along with a string of last 16s too. Xu Zi has never made it to the Crucible though. The closest he came was getting to Judgment Day 2 years ago, but he could very well be a strong contender for a Crucible debutant this year. The man who prevented Neil Robertson from qualifying 12 months ago is also present in this section, as Jamie Jones seeks to make it to the Crucible for a 7th time of his career. Jamie's season, by all accounts, has been pretty rubbish, and he's managed just 1 win more than Jimmy Wright has across the whole campaign. But with the Welshman, it kind of feels like form goes out of the window somewhat when it comes to the qualifiers, and he has proved before that he thrives over the longer format, so should definitely not be discounted. Ashley Carty is another man who has previously qualified for the Crucible 5 years ago, but he too has suffered a very poor season so far, only reaching the last 32 on 2 occasions. Now, do I think Jimmy will come through? No, but I do think he may give this a very good go this time around and could quite conceivably win at least 2 matches here. I am going for the Chinese duo of Xu Zi and Pang Jung-soo to meet on Judgment Day though. Pang has won all 5 of their previous meetings, including on Judgment Day 2 years ago, so everything should really point towards him. But I am going to take a slight punt and have Xu Zi be my second debutant to make it through this year. Wu Yize was the final man to be condemned to the qualifiers after he failed to get the results he needed at the Tour Championship in order to get an automatic Crucible seeding. He may be a little disappointed too, because I thought he was by far the better player against Xiao Guodong, but still managed to be on the wrong side of a 10-8 scoreline last week. Still though, 2 ranking finals this year is some going for the 21-year-old, who has also made it to another semi-final and a quarter-final in what has been a standout season. The cherry on top would be to qualify for the Crucible for a second time, but will he be able to? Tepchaya Anu continues to be one of, if not the most frustrating players on tour at the moment. Seeing him as low down as 43 in the world is such a shame, because he really should be up there with the very best of the sport. Just a single visit to the last 16 of a tournament all season has not helped his cause, and could see his ranking plummet even further if he fails to turn things around next season. Matty Stevens is a player who I think is in the same boat as other men I've mentioned so far, like Graham Dott and Mark Davis, where you kind of feel like their time on tour may soon be coming to an end, depending on potential wildcard availability. However, the 2-time World Championship runner-up is still pretty reliable at the qualifiers. He last made it to the Crucible in 2022, and has made it to Judgment Day in the past 2 years as well, so should not be ignored. Jiang Jun has also been merely a spectator for most of this season. However, 12 months ago he beat the likes of Fan Zheng Yi and Sam Craigie before losing to Hussein Fafai on Judgment Day, so we'll be hoping for a similar kind of run here. 47-year-old Andrew Higginson is also here and has played at the Crucible twice before. However, you do need to go back 13 years to find the last time he did manage to do that. I think this section ultimately boils down to, can either Unnu or Stevens stop Wu Yize on Judgment Day? I am going for Matthew Stevens to be the one that Wu Yize faces, but I still think the youngster will have far too much firepower to overcome his experienced opponent, so I've got Wu Yize to come through. Another of last year's Crucible semi-finalists is world number 23 David Gilbert. Dave has made 2 ranking event quarterfinals this season, but has never really looked like being in contention for a top 16 seeding at any point. He does, however, boast a record of playing at the Crucible in each of the past 6 years, and in that time, he's reached 2 semi-finals there as well. But what has happened to Anthony McGill? I suppose consistency across a whole season was never really his strong suit, but he was always nailed on to reach the Crucible, having played there every year between 2015 and 2023. But he then lost his opening qualifying match last season and comes to Sheffield this year on the back of another season which has lacked any real momentum. And the only time he's made it past the last 32 of a tournament was when he made it to the German Masters quarterfinals. But, in comparison to other results, that came out of nowhere, really. Stuart Carrington has had a bit of a nightmare this season, having not made it past the last 64 of any of the 11 events he's played in. He has qualified for the Crucible 3 times before, but the last time was 7 years ago now. The former World Under-21 World Champion Aaron Hill will also be bidding to make it to the Crucible for the first time. His season has been highlighted by also reaching the quarterfinals in Germany, where he beat the likes of Ding, Mark Williams, Tom Ford, and he's also beaten Jimmy Robertson this season as well. I do again think it will be the 2 highest seeds battling it out on Judgment Day here, and even though it used to be considered unwise to bet against McGill, the current form book would make Gilbert a pretty strong favourite, and I'm not going against him here, so I have last year's semi-finalist to make it back to the Crucible yet again. 2-time semi-finalist Stephen Maguire is next on the agenda here. The Scots' otherwise mediocre season was improved significantly when he made it to the Welsh Open final before losing to Mark Selby. To say he is reliable under these circumstances is an understatement. Just once over the past 21 years has Stephen Maguire failed to play at the Crucible, and whilst many of these appearances has been as a seed, he's been an almost nailed-on qualifier over the past 5 years or so as well. Li Paifan is another Crucible debutant contender this year, and unlike most players at the qualifiers this year, he is a ranking event winner, having won the Scottish Open back in December. Backing that up with consistent results has been a struggle, however no one can be discounting a tournament winner as a potential World Championship qualifier. The Darling of Dublin will be hoping to swap out commentary duty for potentially one more stint at playing at the Crucible, which is something he has not done since 2014, and he has also managed just 2 wins all season. Tianping Fai is an interesting one because he has done very little to note of this season, but has qualified for the Crucible twice over the past 6 years. I also vividly remember the fluke Maguire had against Tian at the Crucible when it looked nailed on that Tian was about to win 10-7, but that fluke happened, Maguire comes back at him and then wins in the decider. So maybe a bit of revenge is on the cards here. And it really would be some story if David Lilley could come through and play at the Crucible for the first time. At 49 years old, that would surely make him the oldest ever World Championship debutant. Again though, I'm being boring and having Maguire and Paifan play out on Judgment Day, and ultimately, I think it will be Maguire I'll be backing to make it through. World number 31 Jimmy Robertson heads up this section and looks to qualify for the World Championship for a 6th time of his career. Jimmy's season started brightly as well, and he bagged £50,000 by reaching the quarterfinals in Saudi Arabia. But as is the case for most players here, getting those results on a consistent basis proved difficult, although he has beaten Mark Allen as recently as last month. We also have Matthew Selt here, who has been no stranger to controversy this season, although that's not exactly new for a man who doesn't shy away from letting you know exactly what and how he is feeling on and off the snooker table. However, when it comes to the qualifiers, he is another man to frequently keep your eye on. He has reached Judgment Day every year since 2019, although in that 6-year period he has only qualified twice. 18-year-old Stan Moody also enters proceedings here, and off the back of his most consistent season yet, could become the youngest crucible qualifier since Luca Russell back in 2012. Plenty has already been said about what this lad could go on to achieve, and after almost tripling the amount of wins he got in the whole of last season this season, he'll be looking to bring his current form into the qualifiers. Anthony Hamilton, of course, qualified and then withdrew from the tournament 5 years ago, so he hasn't actually played at the World Championship since 2008, and a record of just 6 wins all season does little to inspire confidence that that record could change this year. We also have a man who is quickly becoming a favourite commentator to listen to of mine in Stephen Hallworth, and a man who I fear I'm going to absolutely butcher the pronunciation of his name, but Michael Sibersics, who is just 14 years of age, will be the youngest player ever to compete at this event. I have put genuine consideration into Stan Moody's prospects of qualifying here, and whilst I think he may just get to Judgment Day, I ultimately have Matthew Selt to beat him and qualify. And now finally, for those of you who have stuck with it for the past half an hour, we are finally at the last section of this draw where we find a 2-time world finalist Ali Carter. Ali is another man who started the season amongst the world's top 16, but despite winning the Championship League and making back-to-back semi-finals in February, could do nothing to stop the likes of Robertson and Murphy overtaking him in the rankings. Just twice in the past 22 years has Ali Carter not played a part at the Crucible, although both of those have come within the past 5 years. Scott Donaldson on paper looks like Ali's biggest threat, however the 31-year-old has reached the last 16 of a tournament just one occasion this season, so his form doesn't look particularly promising if he wants to qualify for a third time. Hee King hasn't quite been able to replicate what he produced last season, where he reached a quarter-final and a few more last 16s, but after missing out on Judgment Day last year, he will be looking to go one step further and make his Crucible debut this time around. Alfie Burden is also present here, and he is another man whose results have been difficult to come by this season, not making it past the last 64 of any tournament that he's played in, and he's not played at the Crucible since his one and only appearance all the way back in 1998. And we also find 2 former women's world champions in Mink Nutcharat and Baiyu Liu, and the latter of course came within one match of qualifying for the UK Championship back in the winter. She also beat Scott Donaldson there too, which could potentially be a matchup that happens here again should she win her opening 2 matches. Ultimately, I do think Ali finds himself in a relatively comfortable section here, and I expect him to make no mistakes in qualifying, beating Hee King on Judgment Day. And that, for any of you who are crazy enough to still be listening, is that. I've put up all my 16 qualifiers on the screen now. And attempting to predict these qualifiers is like trying to win the lottery. There are always players who come out of nowhere. But as long as I do better than last year, then I'll consider it as a win. As always, let me know in the comments what you think and who you think are going to qualify for this year's World Championship. And make sure you're subscribed to the channel, as I have more videos lined up before the big one gets underway in just under 2 weeks' time.